People think that Donald Trump is going to force Ukraine to surrender to Russia, but in actual fact there are plans to keep Ukraine in the fight. Here we'll explore Europe's plan to maintain support without the United States, and it might just work. On May 11th, 2023, Donald Trump shook the world by saying, "I would have the war settled in one day." Now he's president-elect, and he hasn't put any more detail on that. But there are ultimately two ways to interpret his words. One is that Trump would cut a deal with President Putin. It would almost certainly involve Ukraine ceding territory to Russia and perhaps even signing an agreement to never join NATO. That would be a big win for Putin and drive a wedge between the Western powers of the US and Europe. The second possibility is that Donald Trump pulls US funding from Ukraine altogether. America is by far Ukraine's biggest backer. They've already committed 5 times more military aid than Britain or Germany. Without US support, Ukraine's military will soon run out of the things it needs to defend itself, and Russia will make it to Kiev in short order. But it might not have to go that way. Britain has played a leading role in supporting Ukraine since the war started, and Prime Minister Starmer is continuing that. But can Britain keep its promise without its American ally? Well, it seems he thinks he can. 2 days after the US election, Starmer told the world that Britain's support is iron-clad. Then on Armistice Day, Starmer and President Macron of France released a joint statement, vowing to support Ukraine for as long as it takes to defeat the war of aggression that Russia is waging in Ukraine. But how could Europe possibly afford that? Well, believe it or not, Europe is not a military lame duck. Most European nations are members of NATO. And as members of NATO, they have rules about the size of their military. Specifically, each country is required to spend 2% of its GDP on defence. So, the bigger the economy, the bigger the defence budget and the bigger the military. As an aside, up to 2021, a lot of member states were failing to meet the 2% target, which President Trump called them out on at the time, before saying that he would refuse to defend countries that didn't meet the target. Since the war in Ukraine, though, most nations are now pulling their weight. But 2% is only a baseline, and members are welcome to spend more. Poland has a border with Russia and spends over 4% of its GDP on defence, and has vowed to increase it to nearly 5% in 2025. What that demonstrates is that defence spending is a choice. The size of the military is a choice. But are Europe's pockets deep enough? The European economy is at least 10 times larger than Russia's, so the money does exist to plug the gap, but it will require every nation to re-budget. There is, however, another problem. Unlike the US or Russia, Europe's weapon production is spread across dozens of sovereign states, each with their own bureaucracies and conflicting concerns. It means that it's difficult to build and scale. In a scenario where Trump pulls out, European nations will have to overhaul how they coordinate the manufacture of bombs, bullets, tanks and planes. But in the immediate term, there is a window of opportunity that is rapidly closing. Joe Biden is still the president until January 20th, 2025. These 8 weeks are where Starmer and Macron hope to capitalise. For months, they were lobbying Biden for permission to fire Storm Shadow missiles at targets in Russian territory. The missiles were built by Britain and France, but they use an American guidance system, and Biden was vetoing their use, fearing that Putin could interpret that as an escalation. But since the war started, the US has gradually given greater permissions for the use of its weaponry, and the Storm Shadows were seen as the inevitable next thing on the checklist. But on November 17th, Biden finally gave permission for America's ATACMS missiles to be fired into Russian territory. It's a move that Trump supporters have condemned. Biden has also allowed Ukraine to lay landmines, and he's allowed American private weapon companies to set up shop in Ukraine. And on November 19th or 20th, he finally gave permission to use Storm Shadow. This is a big win for Starmer and Macron, who hope to get as much as they can from America before the new administration comes in. If Trump pulls America out of the war in Ukraine, and if European leaders want to keep Ukraine in the fight, they're going to have to get coordinated. Plans are already in place to better unite the EU's weapon manufacturers, but a large proportion will still have to be bought from abroad, from states including the United States. However, the war without America does also present an opportunity. Starmer, Macron and the other European leaders will no longer need US permission to fire their weapons, allowing them to make faster decisions in the escalating conflict. There is one final thing to consider though. If Donald Trump proposes a deal which Zelensky and Europe rejects, then Western alliances will genuinely be at their weakest point since the Second World War. And that's something that will make Putin very happy.